Imagine standing in the middle of this um, just bustling, really vibrant language exchange event.
Oh, I can picture it perfectly.
Right. Like you spent years studying. You have this massive 10,000 word vocabulary just locked in your brain.
Yeah.
You completely understand the mechanics of the past perfect continuous tense. Your grammar is, technically speaking, flawless.
But
But, and there is always a but, you're standing there gripping a lukewarm cup of coffee, totally frozen, with absolutely no idea how to actually make a single friend in the room.
it's a profound disconnect, really. You possess all this linguistic data, but you have zero social momentum.
Zero.
And, well, the sources we're diving into today highlight this exact phenomenon. They argue that fluency in a language and fluency in connection are they're two entirely different skill sets.
Which is so interesting to think about.
It is, because you can have textbook perfect English, but if you don't understand the mechanics of social initiation, you just, remain isolated.
And that's really the core mission of our deep dive today. We're pulling from this fascinating stack of sources dedicated to the art of making friends in English.
Yeah, and the central thesis here is incredibly liberating, honestly.
It really is. The idea that you do not need perfect grammar to make a great first impression.
Exactly. You just need a completely different toolkit. You need curiosity. You need to understand the cultural rhythms of conversation.
Right. The mechanics of moving from a total stranger to an acquaintance and then eventually to a friend.
Because the anxiety mostly comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what the other person is actually evaluating.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, when learners step into a social setting, they often operate under the assumption that the native speaker is, grading their grammar.
Yes. Like they have a red pen out in their mind.
Right. They think a misplaced preposition is going to just ruin the entire interaction. But the research in these sources shows that people are actually evaluating warmth, intent, and shared interest.
So the grammar is really secondary to the emotional resonance of the interaction.
Exactly. Completely secondary.
Okay, so let's put you, the listener, right back into that bustling room. You're standing by the snack table, feeling that social paralysis. How do we actually break this?
Well, we have to look at what's keeping you frozen.
Right, because the sources point out this really heartbreaking anecdote about a language learner who attended a local exchange meetup every single week. Religiously.
Yeah, I remember that part.
But they never actually had a meaningful conversation. Not once.
And they never had a conversation because they fell into the trap of passive proximity.
Passive proximity.
Yeah, it's this psychological illusion that simply being in the room, being physically near people who are speaking English, is somehow enough to spark a connection.
You just assume your presence will eventually prompt someone else to do all the heavy lifting.
Right. You're waiting for them to initiate.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like standing at the edge of a swimming pool.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You're just standing there waiting for the water to miraculously warm up on its own.
Yeah.
But eventually, you just have to jump in.
You do, because, to borrow a concept from social psychology, everyone else is already managing their own cognitive load.
They're nervous, too.
Exactly. To walk over to a silent stranger requires a really high expenditure of social energy. The sources make it clear you cannot be part of the furniture.
Right. You have to provide the spark.
And you do that by minimizing the risk for the other person, using what the sources call a situational icebreaker.
Okay, so the text mentions phrases like, is this seat taken? Or, mind if I join you? Or, what brings you here?
Yes, classic openers.
But let's look at the mechanics of that.
Okay.
Why do those specific phrases work so much better than, say, walking up and introducing yourself with your name and your entire backstory?
It really just comes down to lowering the stakes.
Lowering the stakes.
Yeah. If you walk up and say, hello, my name is John, I am an engineer from Madrid, you're forcing the other person to immediately process a lot of personal data.
You're kind of demanding a high-level interaction right out of the gate.
Exactly. But a situational opener, like what brings you here, or, commenting on the incredibly long line for coffee.
That shifts the focus to a shared external environment.
Precisely. It allows the other person to respond casually without feeling evaluated or cornered.
But there is a glaring pitfall here that the sources flag as a major mistake.
Oh, a huge one.
Say you finally muster the courage to initiate. The temptation, especially if you're nervous and just grabbing for the first English sentence, is to ask something incredibly direct.
Like, how old are you? Or, are you married?
Right. Which triggers an immediate defensive response in many English-speaking cultures.
It really does. It's jarring.
But why is that? because, I mean, in some cultures, establishing age or marital status is just standard procedure.
Sure, it's how you figure out the hierarchy.
Exactly, the level of respect required. So why does it cause such a sudden freeze in an English-speaking context?
Because relationship building in Western English-speaking context usually operates on a model of concentric circles.
Concentric circles. Okay, explain that.
So the outermost circle is neutral territory. The weather, the event you're attending, maybe a shared observation about the venue.
Right.
The inner circles contain personal details like age, relationship status, finances.
So if you just take a sledgehammer to those outer rings and demand entry into the inner circle on minute 1,
It doesn't feel friendly. It feels invasive. You're violating the cultural expectation of pacing.
wow, okay. So the first practical speaking tip to pull from this section: do not wait to be rescued.
Definitely not.
And when you do initiate, operate in the outermost circle. Pick one low-stakes situational question like, what brings you here? And treat it as your conversational key.
It unlocks the door without setting off the alarm.
Unlocks the door without setting off the alarm. I love that.
But, unlocking the door is just the first step. You still have to walk through it and actually sustain the interaction.
Which brings us to the terrifying reality of the 10-second silence.
Oh, the dreaded silence.
You successfully asked, what brings you here? They answered, oh, I'm just looking to practice my Spanish. And then nothing.
Just crickets.
You're both just staring at each other?
Yeah.
How do we keep the conversation from flatlining right there?
The transition from the opener to the actual conversation requires a shift. You have to move from situational questions to exploratory questions.
Exploratory questions?
Yeah, you're looking for a hook. The sources recommend gently probing how they spend their time with questions like, what do you do for fun? Or, have you lived in this city long?
You're panning for gold, looking for a shared interest.
Exactly.
I see where the sources are going with this, but my initial thought as a language learner is just pure panic.
Why is that?
Well, if my brain is operating at maximum capacity, just trying to translate vocabulary in real time, asking follow-up questions sounds exhausting.
For sure. It's a heavy cognitive lift.
So it's incredibly tempting to just use questions as a shield. I ask them a question, they talk for 2 minutes, I nod, and then I just fire off another question.
Let them do all the work.
Right. That way they do all the talking,
Yeah.
and my English isn't exposed.
It is a brilliant survival mechanism, I'll give you that. But it is a terrible strategy for making friends.
Why?
The sources explicitly identify this as the interrogation trap.
The interrogation trap, because you sound like a detective.
Exactly. Where do you work? What do you do? Who do you know?
Just firing off questions.
When you continuously fire questions without offering any information in return, you create this really unbalanced dynamic.
I guess the native speaker might not consciously realize you're just hiding behind your questions because of language anxiety.
No, they don't. Subconsciously, what they register is a lack of trust.
I see.
Because true connection requires reciprocal vulnerability. If they offer a piece of their life, the social contract dictates that you must offer a piece of yours.
Okay, so if they say, I really love hiking on the weekends, I shouldn't just immediately ask, what is your favorite trail?
Right.
I need to anchor it to my own experience first. Something like, oh, I've always wanted to try hiking, but I usually just end up running in the city. Where's a good place for a beginner to start?
Yes. Look at the mechanics of what you just did there. You validated their interest, you revealed a small vulnerability.
That I'm a beginner who just runs in the city.
And then you asked the follow-up. You traded information. You didn't just extract it.
But the flip side of that trap is equally dangerous. Let's look at the other major mistake the sources highlight in this phase.
The dreaded one-word answer.
Yes. You ask me what I do for fun, and I just look at you and say, reading.
That one-word answer is the equivalent of just throwing a brick wall into the middle of the dialogue.
But why does it kill the conversation so quickly? Because technically, it's a complete, accurate answer to the question.
It's about the conversational burden. When someone asks you a question, they're throwing you a ball. If you just say reading, you're essentially dropping the ball on the floor and staring at them.
Forcing them to pick it up.
Exactly. Force them to pick it up and throw a completely new one. You're forcing the other person to manufacture all the momentum. A good conversationalist provides hooks.
Hooks. Things for the other person to grab onto.
Yes.
So instead of just saying reading, I'd say, I really enjoy reading mystery novels, especially right before bed.
Precisely. Now look at all the hooks you just handed them.
They can grab onto the mystery genre.
Or they can grab onto the routine of reading before bed. Or they could ask for book recommendation,
You've given them 3 different paths to continue the interaction naturally.
which radically lowers their cognitive load.
That leads right into our practical speaking tip for maintaining the conversation. Treat your answers like you are handing out hooks.
Never give a one-word answer.
Always expand with one extra detail, a why, a when, or a where, and utilize active listening phrases like, tell me more about that, to balance the exchange.
And if you master that reciprocal exchange, the anxiety really starts to melt away. The conversation actually begins to flow.
Okay, so let's assume the conversation is flowing beautifully. You're trading hooks, you're finding common ground,
Sounds great.
but there is this lingering frustration that the sources address next. You might feel like the interaction is going well, but you still sound like a walking grammar textbook.
But yes, you feel stiff.
You're communicating effectively, but it just lacks warmth.
This is a really critical threshold. It's the gap between basic comprehension and advanced fluency.
Because in the early stages of learning English, you're taught these highly literal, direct translations.
Right. If you enjoy a song, you learn to say, I like music.
If you want to see someone again, you say, let us meet,
If you think they're pleasant, you say, you were nice.
which is grammatically flawless.
completely flawless. But socially, it sounds robotic. It lacks the nuance and texture of native speech.
So the sources suggest swapping out these rigid structures for specific types of phrases.
Idioms and phrasal verbs, mostly.
Right. Instead of I like music, saying I'm really into pop music these days. Instead of the formal let's meet, you say we should grab a coffee sometime.
We're moving heavily into words like catch up, hang out, hit it off.
Why are these specific phrases the secret to sounding natural?
Well, think of an idiom or a phrasal verb as a digital zip file.
A zip file. Okay, wait, I actually really like that. Unpack the mechanics of that metaphor for us.
Sure. When you use formal textbook English, you're sending raw, uncompressed data.
Like saying, I desire to spend time with you.
Exactly. The listener has to receive that data and actively interpret the emotional tone behind it. It feels heavy.
Right.
But an idiom like let's hang out is a highly compressed file. It contains the literal request, but it also contains a layer of informality, a layer of cultural warmth.
And a signal that you understand the casual rhythm of their language.
Exactly. When a native speaker hears let's hang out, they instantly decompress all of that meaning without having to think about it.
So you're sending the emotional tone natively. You aren't just translating your language, you're translating the vibe.
You're proving cultural fluency, and that immediately breaks down the invisible barrier between language learner and native speaker.
It places you both on equal footing as potential friends.
Yes.
I want to look closer at one of those specific phrases, because I think the underlying psychology here is fascinating. The sources heavily push the phrase, we should grab a coffee sometime, over let's meet for dinner, or we should get together.
Oh yeah, the coffee strategy.
Why is coffee the ultimate social currency here?
It is all about risk mitigation.
Risk mitigation.
Yeah, because asking a new acquaintance to dinner is a high-stakes proposition.
It really is.
Yeah.
It implies a significant commitment of time, usually an hour or more, and a financial cost.
And if the conversation dries up after 10 minutes, both parties are basically trapped until the check arrives.
It's a hostage situation with appetizers.
It really is. But grabbing a coffee is universally understood as time-bounded.
Right, it signals to the other person, this will only take 20 minutes, it costs $3, and if we don't click, you can easily excuse yourself.
By minimizing the social risk, you drastically increase the likelihood that they'll actually say yes.
That makes profound sense. The language you choose dictates the level of pressure you place on the relationship.
Absolutely.
So the practical speaking tip to pull from this: prioritize connection over perfection by preloading 1 or 2 of these zip files into your brain before you even enter the room.
Just decide beforehand. If this goes well, I am going to use the phrase hit it off or suggest we grab a coffee.
Having those compressed files ready just lowers your own mental strain.
It's so much easier to deploy a natural phrase when you aren't trying to invent it on the spot while translating 3 other thoughts simultaneously.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most delicate phase of the entire process.
The goodbye.
You took the plunge. You found common ground. You successfully deployed your idioms, and you established that you'd love to grab a coffee.
Everything is going great.
But the language event is winding down. You actually have to leave the room. How do we execute the goodbye?
The exit is where a surprisingly high number of interactions just completely fall apart.
The sources call out a specific phenomenon here. Mistake number 4. The abrupt exit.
Oh, it's so common.
I was reading this section, and I could vividly picture it. You've been chatting with someone for 20 minutes, the energy is great. Suddenly, you look at your phone, realize you have to catch the train, and you just say, okay, I have to go. Bye.
And you just turn your back and walk away.
It's the conversational equivalent of dropping the microphone in the middle of a beautiful song.
That is a brilliant way to describe it. To the native speaker left standing there, that sudden drop is incredibly jarring.
But why do learners do this? If the conversation was going so well, why sabotage the ending?
In many cases, it's an adrenaline response.
Adrenaline. Really?
Yeah. Participating in a second language requires intense focus. Once you realize you've survived the interaction and successfully connected, the adrenaline spikes.
Ah, and you just want to escape the situation before you make a grammatical error that ruins it.
Exactly. So you eject immediately.
You quit while you're ahead.
Yes. But the tragedy is that the native speaker doesn't know you're fleeing out of linguistic exhaustion.
What do they think?
They interpret the abrupt exit as rejection. They think, wow, I guess they didn't actually enjoy talking to me after all.
That is tragic.
You have to understand that social interactions possess a built-in rhythm, and that rhythm includes a necessary cool-down period.
You can't just sever the connection. You have to build a bridge out of it.
Exactly.
So what does that bridge look like in practice? How do we construct a cool-down period that actually secures the connection?
The sources provide a very reliable two-step formula. The first step is retrospective validation.
Retrospective validation. Okay, meaning?
You anchor the present moment by confirming that the time spent together was valuable. You use phrases like, it was really great meeting you, or I had a lot of fun talking with you today.
Oh, so you're confirming that the last 20 minutes were a success, eliminating any guesswork on their end.
Correct. And then the second step is future orientation.
Future orientation.
Yeah, you open the door for the relationship to continue. Hope to see you around again, or let's keep in touch.
And we pair this with exchanging contact info, right?
Yes.
The sources make a really interesting distinction here between asking for a phone number versus asking for social media.
They do, asking, are you on Instagram? Or asking to connect on LinkedIn, depending on the context, is highly recommended over asking for a direct phone number.
Because it goes back to that concept of stakes, doesn't it?
Completely.
A phone number is a direct, synchronous line of communication. It's highly personal.
Exactly. Social media is asynchronous. It allows the other person to observe your life and interact with you at their own pace with very low pressure.
It's the digital equivalent of grabbing a coffee.
That's a perfect comparison.
Yeah.
It keeps the door open without demanding immediate entry.
So our final practical speaking tip for the goodbye. Never leave an interaction dangling. Master the two-step formula.
Validate the
It
interaction
was great talking to you.
and provide a future-oriented bridge.
Let's connect on Instagram.
It's a simple formula, but it completely changes the emotional aftertaste of the conversation. They walk away feeling valued rather than confused.
Wow. When you zoom out and look at all the mechanics we've unpacked today, from the initial situational opener to handing out conversational hooks to deploying idioms as zip files and finally building a bridge during the goodbye,
It fundamentally changes how you view learning English.
it really does. You're no longer studying a rigid set of rules just to pass an exam. You are acquiring a toolkit specifically designed to unlock human connection.
And that shift in perspective is the ultimate takeaway from these sources.
If you can stop viewing social interactions as a test of your grammar and start viewing them as an opportunity to discover shared interests,
The anxiety of that crowded room just begins to evaporate. You stop managing your vocabulary and start engaging with the person in front of you.
you step out of the textbook and into the real world.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered the complete architecture of making a friend in a second language today. But before we close out this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought experiment, drawn directly from the philosophy of our sources.
Something for you to mull over as you navigate your own language journey.
Right.
It's a question designed to clarify your underlying motivations. If you could make one new friend from anywhere in the world using the English you already possess today, which country would they be from and why?
What specific cultural perspective, humor, or lifestyle are you genuinely curious to understand?
It's a great question to ask yourself.
Hold on to that curiosity. Let it drive you past the fear of making a mistake. The next time you find yourself standing at the edge of that bustling room, don't wait for someone to rescue you.
Find an empty seat.
Ask a situational question and jump in. Thanks for exploring these sources with us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.